In Minneapolis, there's a traffic circle so strange it breaks nearly every rule in the engineering playbook. Sharp entry angles, confusing lane markings, sight lines half the required length. Official guidelines predicted chaos here. Yet, since installation in 2008, crashes dropped by 80%. How is one of the strangest traffic circles actually working, against all expert logic? To find out, you need to know just how dangerous this intersection once was, and why breaking every convention was its only shot at survival. Entry angles here don't just look off, they measure nearly 70 degrees, which means drivers approach the circle almost head-on instead of curving gently in. The lane markings zig and loop in ways that seem to contradict standard logic, with arrows that point more like suggestions than rules. Some approach lanes narrow abruptly, while others widen without warning, creating a patchwork of painted lines that confuses even seasoned drivers. At first glance, the sight lines appear short enough that approaching vehicles have little time to react, especially compared to the long, open views found in typical roundabouts. It's not just the geometry that feels wrong. The central island sits slightly askew, offset from the intersection's true center, and landscaping blocks a clear view of circulating traffic. A few drivers slow to a crawl, hesitating at the yield line, while others edge forward, uncertain who has the right of way. The result is a kind of visual puzzle that leaves newcomers searching for clues. Where to look, when to stop, which lane to follow. Even regular users admit the layout feels like it's breaking every rule in the manual. Yet despite this tangle of markings and odd angles, something about the chaos seems to hold drivers' attention. The confusion is real, but so is the order that somehow emerges from it. 5 years before the redesign, the intersection at 66th Street and Portland Avenue in Richfield had become a local hazard. City records and news archives show 135 crashes and 22 injuries logged in that short span, a rate that put this crossroads among the most dangerous in Hennepin County. Neighbors grew used to the sound of screeching brakes and the sight of crumpled bumpers. During morning rush hour, drivers jockeyed for position, some rolling through yellow lights, others hesitating in confusion as turning vehicles cut across multiple lanes. Emergency services responded to collisions here several times each month, and the intersection's reputation spread beyond the immediate neighborhood. Residents and business owners pressed city officials for answers, citing near misses and close calls that never made it into the official numbers. The city council fielded complaints at nearly every meeting. Parents worried about kids crossing to the park, cyclists avoiding the area entirely, and pedestrians timing their crossings with a mix of hope and calculation. By 2008, the pressure had reached a tipping point. Local papers ran features on the intersection's grim statistics, and city engineers found themselves under scrutiny from both the public and their peers. The question wasn't whether something needed to change, but how much risk the city was willing to tolerate before acting. Standard roundabout engineering calls for gentle curves, clear sight lines, and approach angles that ease drivers into the flow. At this Minneapolis circle, nearly every one of those rules takes a back seat. The design team signed off on entry angles measured at 70 degrees, far sharper than the Federal Highway Administration's recommended 20 to 40 degrees for multi-lane roundabouts. With approach lanes that squeeze down to just 10 feet wide in spots, drivers find themselves threading through tighter spaces than the usual 12-foot standard. Official specifications call for a minimum sight line of 120 feet at entry, but here, landscaping and the offset island cut that distance almost in half. The posted design speed is set at 16 miles per hour, a full 10 below what most roundabouts of this size are built to handle. Lane markings ignore the usual spiral patterns, instead looping and doubling back in ways that would never pass a typical Minnesota Department of Transportation review. Even the yield lines are painted further back from the circle than standard, forcing drivers to make snap decisions with less visual information than engineers usually allow. According to the Minnesota Department of Transportation's own manuals, these choices break with guidelines meant to keep intersections predictable and safe. Yet, after multiple reviews, the city's public works team moved ahead, convinced that the only way to address the site's unique constraints was to color outside the lines of conventional practice. Crash reports from the first full year after installation told a different story than anyone expected. Instead of the predicted chaos, the numbers took a nosedive. The city's annual traffic count, cross-checked with police logs, showed an 80% drop in total crashes compared to the 5 years before the redesign. The pattern held steady. Where there had been 135 collisions and 22 injuries in the previous half-decade, the new circle saw only a handful of minor fender benders and just 4 reported injuries in its first 5 years. Injury severity fell even further, down 83%, with ambulance call-outs shifting from a monthly routine to a rare event. Pedestrian and cyclist incidents, which had worried neighbors and city officials alike, all but disappeared from the official records. Traffic flow metrics followed the same trend. Average vehicle delay at peak times dropped by nearly a third, and morning backups that once stretched for blocks now cleared within minutes. Emergency vehicles cut response times by using the circle's wide approaches, bypassing the old gridlock. For drivers, the daily routine shifted from tense standoffs and last-second braking to a steady, if cautious, rhythm. The data left little room for debate. Whatever the design looked like on paper, the real-world numbers were impossible to ignore. Businesses along 66th Street started noticing a difference within a year of the redesign. Where once customers complained about near misses in the parking lot and delivery trucks struggled with unpredictable backups, the new routine brought steadier traffic and easier access. Store owners who had worried the circle would scare people away instead reported a small but steady uptick in foot traffic. Residential property values in the immediate area, which had stagnated for years, showed a 6% rise between 2009 and 2012, outpacing citywide averages during the same period. Realtors began mentioning the roundabout as a selling point, pointing to quieter streets and fewer traffic complaints from neighbors. For families, the drop in collisions meant less anxiety about letting kids walk to the park or bike to the library. The city's planning office fielded calls from other neighborhoods interested in similar projects. By 2025, Minneapolis Public Works had greenlit 49 new mini-circles for construction, citing the positive results at 66th and Portland as a key factor. What started as a controversial fix for a single intersection quickly became a model for neighborhood safety and local investment. Cities looking to borrow from Minneapolis's experience have a few clear guideposts. First, the city's approach shows that breaking from the manual isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It works best when there's a real mismatch between standard engineering and what's actually happening on the ground. Planners here started with a pilot, watching how drivers responded before making anything permanent. That allowed them to catch early problems and make small corrections, like adjusting lane markings or shifting yield lines, instead of doubling down on a design that wasn't working. Documentation played a big role. Every change was tracked, measured, and reviewed, not just by engineers, but by the public and city officials. The city's traffic division didn't just rely on crash statistics either. They looked at how people walked, biked, and even how businesses fared after installation. When the first round of circles showed promise, Minneapolis Public Works used that data to justify rolling out 49 more mini-circles in 2025, each one tailored to its block. The lesson isn't that every city should throw out the rulebook, but that there's room for experimentation, especially when the process stays transparent, the results are shared, and the community is part of the conversation from the start. In the 5 years before its installation in 2008, this Minneapolis intersection saw 135 crashes and 22 injuries. After the unconventional circle was built, despite violating Minnesota Department of Transportation guidelines for entry angles and sightlines, crashes dropped by 80% and injury rates fell by 83%, according to Minneapolis Public Works data. Property values in the surrounding neighborhood rose by 6%, and 49 similar circles have since been planned citywide. Yet some uncertainties remain. No long-term studies have answered whether these benefits will persist as traffic volumes change, and federal guidelines have not been revised to reflect these outliers. Still, the documented improvements in safety, flow, and community support have shifted local policy and professional opinion. As case studies from this intersection now appear in engineering journals, the evidence shows that challenging established rules, when grounded in data and community input, can deliver results. For urban planners nationwide, the Minneapolis Circle stands as proof that measured risk and local context can drive real progress.